Mad Science Foundation. This is a game that I saw for the first time at Gen Con 2016. I also met with one of the designers back then. He was a really nice guy, seemed very passionate, so I was curious about the game, but somehow I didn't pick up a copy. I don't remember why. But I did pick up a copy recently. I saw one in my friendly local game store, and so I finally got to try Mad Science Foundation, a game where insane inventions inspire infamy. In this game, players are mad scientists that are trying to compete with one another to build the craziest inventions, to just create the most insane new things. And as they do so, they're also trying to funnel money from the Mad Science Foundation towards their own projects, which sounds pretty much like regular academia to me. With the exception that if you are the biggest, baddest, cleverest mad scientist, then you can get control of the entire tri-state area. And if you get that quote, we should be friends if we aren't already. Now, how about the game? It comes in this nice box here. Here you have the rules. Big rule book, but not too much text. The rules are very, very simple. You have an infamy track, which is used to keep score, and once you remove it, lots of air. This is one of those boxes with a lot of air in it. You have a small deck of resource cards that will be used, well, guess what, to build your inventions. You have these pawns here representing minions. Only one of them is in play at the beginning of the game, which is the Crooked Director of the Foundation. The other minions will come into play later, and again, they're the biggest components in the box, and they're not necessary because they could just be represented by normal tokens. And then you have deck of cards, several decks of cards. You have the headquarters that represents the initial card of each player. You give one to each player. That also determines the token that the player will use on the scoreboard. And once you assign that a card and the corresponding token, the player places that card in front of themselves and places it turned by 90 degrees, indicating it's a prototype, it's a project, the card is available to be built, to be developed, but it hasn't been developed yet. Each player also gets a quirk, because what is a mad scientist without a quirky aspect, and each quirk will give you slightly different instructions and slightly different ways to score points at the end of the game to get that extra boost if you have been able to meet certain conditions, to build towards meeting your conditions at the end of the game, the conditions of your quirk. But the real heart of the game is in the inventions. It is in the inventions. Now, what happens in the game? Now, at the beginning of the game, the spawn is assigned randomly. Later, it will be assigned differently. Each turn, any new invention card is turned face up, and a number of resources depending on the number of players. Suppose that we have 3 resources per turn. Oh, and these are not good examples. These are. There we go. We have 3 resources. Now, what happens? It happens that the player that has the Crooked Director will choose how to organize these resources into piles. And suppose this is a 2-player game, so we only have 2 piles. These 4 cards can be placed in any organization in any way one wants. You need to have at least 1 card in one pile and the other ones in the other. Multiple players, simply it's divided in a number of piles equal to the number of players. And the Crooked Director can choose to organize them in any way they want. However, like in the traditional principle of kids cutting the cake, I cut it, you pick first, this is precisely what happens here. The Crooked Director needs to be fair, so I don't know how the Crooked theme plays into this, because the Crooked Director needs to be super mega fair, because the Crooked Director will get to pick last. Suppose the Crooked Director decided to assign cards like this. My opponent takes these 2 cards, so then the Crooked Director takes that card, these cards, adds them to their play area, and we're good. Then players can develop inventions by spending their resources. Suppose that they do have these resources. I have 2 sharks, and here this scary chemical component. Then I discard I discard the necessary cards, and I develop my inventions. Also, inventions that have been developed can be used. You can press the button. I guess it's optional, but the rules say you should do it, and it really adds to the game. Especially if you add different sounds to the different buttons. When you press the buttons, you get the advantage described here. Sometimes you gain a lot of infamy. Infamy is the currency in the game. That is actually the victory points in the game. The currency, I guess, is the resources. So in this case, for example, I gain 11 infamy, I get the corresponding number of points, and I destroy the invention. In other cases, you have inventions that can be used multiple times. For example, you have that invention that needs to be fueled by cards, and I can spend sharks, and each time I spend a shark, and I press that button, it produces three infamy points. As I said, these are the tokens coming to play later. They come into play due to these cards. When these cards come out, then the corresponding minion becomes a part of the game, and simply the minion goes to the person that controls it. But then the cards representing the minions in play are put back at the center of the table at the beginning of the following round. So they simply become part of the resources that are out there to be distributed and to be divided. So next time the director may say, okay, I'm making a pile with the invention, the crook director, another pile with these two things, and another pile with these two things, another pile like this, if we have, for example, 3 players. And so you reassign the cards, and therefore you assign the minions. And different minions have different abilities. For example, the Sassy Al, or AI, I'm not sure, gives you infamy. And then we have this other thing that gives you money here. And then we have the other, where is it? The Chocolate of Cash, the one that gives you money. The Spy, I wanted to show you. The Spy card, who knows where it went. In any case, what the Spy does is that it lets you block an invention of an opponent. The opponent cannot use an invention while you place your Spy token there on that invention. Here we go. And this is how the game works. You continue drawing resources, making a pool in there. The director divides it. Everybody picks. The director picks last. You build and use your invention. So you continue like this until the invention deck has been depleted. At that point, the player with the highest infamy is the winner of the game. At the beginning of the game, the director goes around the table, moving to the left from player to player. Later, the director becomes a resource, becomes a minion when the resource card is drawn, and again, simply it will be assigned to the players. So this is how the game works. Mad Science Foundation, the game where you may become the leader of the tri-state area. It's a fun game. It's a simple, fun game. Reminds me, well, it's not like I haven't seen this mechanic here, but I would say here it is implemented well. Mechanically, it is implemented in a simple, linear, very intuitive way, but it still allows you to make a couple of interesting decisions because, of course, when you're the director, you have great power, but with great power also must come great cleverness, otherwise you'll never get what you want. And there's, of course, also something to be said for being first and picking from piles that you haven't made. So you always have to look at what the other players have and what they clearly want. So you give them something of what they want, and you try to make them uninterested in the pile that you really want. But of course, at the same time, they may decide to get for something that is slightly disadvantageous to them, or is not the most advantageous thing, when it's too obvious that you have less something that is hugely beneficial for you. So it's just a single idea, really. The game revolves around a single idea, dividing and then picking in order. But both at the division level, both at the picking level, there are definitely a lot of interesting decisions here, a lot of interesting aspects. If anything, as the game progresses and each player has a couple of inventions and a couple of other cards and some resources, then with more than 2 players can get a little convoluted and complicated. precisely to get a good sense of what everybody has, and it would be a pity if analysis paralysis entered the picture, which I guess could happen in some cases, could happen in some groups. Two-player games, you shouldn't have that problem. Again, not just because you do not have to card on the table for many players, but simply because it's more intuitive to get a sense of what everybody exactly has. If you have an obsessive player that wants to make sure that they get a perfect sense of what everybody has, that may slow down the game. But I do not see this as being a major problem, not something that is intrinsic to the design. Design per se is fun, is solid, doesn't overstay its welcome. If you think that it does, if you feel that it does, you can reduce the number of inventions in the deck to shorten the game. So it's a game that's also easily customizable. If you don't like a certain minion, if you don't like a certain card, then you do not have to use it. And actually, I think I will experiment with that. Experiment with the idea of playing without the minions, because while I like them, I like their effect, it does make sometimes a little bit cumbersome then to have to put all the cards in the middle, and then it makes the pile in the middle a little more burdensome. And every time, okay, you have that effect, I know you'll have it, the spy does this. It just adds a little bit of a repetitive quality, a little bit of an extra step that it's fun to have, but I'm not sure that it's entirely worth the effort. But again, I'll experiment with that. I like the game as is. I wonder if it's going to be even better without the minions, simply keeping it clear without inventions and resources, and the director going around in a deterministic way. I wonder if it'll be even better. But as is, this is a it's a pretty good game. It's a pretty good game, solid, entertaining, very easy to play. There is a huge number of effects. The inventions are pretty much self-explanatory. The theme is fun. If you look at what the inventions do, there really is some humor. There is some fun humor in here. When you look at the title and you look at what the invention does, there is a tongue-in-cheekness. But it's not a party game. It's not a party game in the sense that it's just about like giggling and laughing and making jokes, because the mechanics are those of a solid game. So you have a solid game with a humorous bend rather than just, like a simple party entertaining game like Cards Against Humanity. Mad Science Foundation, I liked it, I enjoyed it. It's not too expensive, and I wish that the box was a little smaller, because I really can't justify morally a box this big. But what can I do? Other than that, definitely a good game and a good production.